The new true crime docuseries Murder Among the Mormons on Netflix dives into the crimes of an infamous Utah con man. And this morning, we're talking with a Utah historian featured in the series who knew that man. Con man Mark Hoffman gained fame in the 1980s for getting his hands on what appeared to be all kinds of rare documents, but they ended up being excellent forgeries. Many of those forgeries documents about the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When suspicions grew about Hoffman's forgeries, he set off a series of bombs in Salt Lake City, killing 2 people. Murder Among the Mormons is #2 on Netflix right now. It is wildly popular, and it's easy to see why. Joining me to talk more about that series, Brent Ashworth, a historian and document collector featured in this series and still working in the field. Brent, thanks so much for getting up early with us this morning and chatting with me about the series.
Sure, sir. Yeah, thank you.
So, I mean, people who've watched the show will recognize you, but can you elaborate a little bit for me? How would you characterize your relationship with Mark Hoffman?
Well, I was a collector for many years before I met Mark. I met him by phone call. I called him up one day because I'd gotten his number. He had already come up with what was called the Anthon transcript and Joseph Smith III blessing when I met him in April of 1981. And I asked him if he had a letter of Joseph Smith, because I'd had documents but never a letter. And he quoted me a letter that he had that said he got it from a large Texas collection. And I eventually paid him $6,000 for that letter. Turned out later, of course, that it was a forgery, but all the experts looked at it and other things that I bought over the years and declared them to be authentic at the time. And so I thought I didn't think of forgery at all. In fact, at that time, he was an excellent forger, but we didn't know that.
Incredible. So you purchased a forgery from Mark Hoffman. Do you still have that letter?
Yes. That particular letter actually was later traded because Mark wanted that one back. I have the Lucy Mack Smith letter, which is probably the most famous one that I purchased from him. And for 3.5 years, the church thought it was its earliest dated document because it's dated in 1829 from the mother of the prophet Joseph Smith to her sister-in-law Mary Pierce. And Hoffman even had the postal markings down as being accurate and so on. So it was an amazing piece of work. In fact, it seemed like every time I asked Mark for a particular item, he eventually came up with it. It's kind of like order up as I look back at it now.
Right. That was something that I found interesting about the documentary. They revisit that kind of piece. Whenever someone asked Mark for something, he could find it. So I'm curious, like the documentary process, what was it like revisiting this crazy time in Utah history and church history for you?
Well, it was a sad time for us. We had a son involved in a terrible accident, and it was a horrible time for us because he eventually passed away. It was due to partly our inattention due to the Hoffman thing that we were out of town briefly, and so it was painful in some ways. It was prophylactic in others in order to tell our story and get it out again. But yeah, I thought the documentary process was very interesting. They interviewed me a year ago, February, in my shop right before the pandemic took off in March.
Got it, right. So your shop, B. Ashworth's, is right at Provo downtown. I've been there. It's really an incredible space. We just have a couple of seconds left, but I've got to ask you really briefly. I'm sure that this time in history changed how you do your work. You're still collecting documents and artifacts. How has your skepticism maybe changed over the years?
Oh, well, we question everything now, and we like to use the word provenance. A good LDS word is genealogy. We like to have a history of each document, where they've come from and so on, as far back as we can take them physically, as to who they originated with, who's had them in the meantime, and we like that kind of information as much as we can. I think institutions are also much more careful due to the Hoffman episode.
Right. All right. We're speaking this morning with Brent Ashworth. I wish we had more time with you, Brent, because I have so many more questions, but thank you for taking the time. You can find his shop, B. Ashworth's, in Provo. Thanks so much, Brent.
Thank you. Appreciate it, sir.